Last month, we started a new series entitled Your Life, Your Choice, during which Dr. Kevin Lentin, who is a chiropractor / health and lifestyle consultant, as well as an intermediate life support paramedic, is sharing many of the pearls of wisdom, as he calls them, that he's accumulated over 25 years in clinical practice. Good to have you back with us, Kevin.
Thank you. Good morning, Lynn.
Before we get into the nitty-gritty of today's discussion, you were telling me about the Argus. You were doing some major duty there this year.
Yes, well, one of my hobbies, I suppose you could call it, my volunteer contribution, is working as a paramedic. And we obviously try to get involved in any of the community functions, which includes a lot of the sports. And, of course, the Argus is a major factor for us every year. So we had a team on from our False Bay volunteers, and we had a caravan, which was based at the base of the Glencairn Expressway. And a lot of our guys and girls were there rubbing legs and helping. And then we had our ambulance as well, which was mobile on the route. But fortunately, I'm happy to say there weren't too many serious injuries, certainly not in our little sector.
So thankful we can be for that, compared to last year. Huh?
Yes, I know.
Yeah, especially because of the wind.
Yes.
Kevin, before we pick up where we left off last time, for the benefit of those who weren't with us last time, give us a little bit of a summary in terms of what we spoke about.
Right, Lynn. The sort of overall title really was Your Life, Your Choice, as you know. And really what I'm trying to get across to people is that in order to live a happy, fulfilled, prosperous, healthy life, one needs to take responsibility. And that responsibility essentially defaults right back to us as individuals. I think too often we go looking for health and wellness and any factor that you might consider to as a success in your life. We look for it in the wrong place. So when it comes to success, oftentimes we think that material success is really once you've got the big car or the fancy house or the very nice job, that you've actually arrived and that you're successful. And very often
we hit with the reality.
Quite right.
That's not the be all and end all.
Absolutely. So I'm trying to, in inverted commas, unpack different concepts and perhaps help people to understand that really to achieve one's ultimate state of well-being or that state of inner peace is quite an involved process, and one has to look at a whole range of different criteria in order to really achieve a point of cellular wellness. Now, that cellular wellness means that every little cell in your body, of which we have a lot, as everybody knows, has a little brain of its own. It's called a nucleus. Now, those of the listeners out there that can remember their biology, and you remember the little cell, and it's got a little area called a nucleus, and in there is the genetic material. And that genetic material is what oftentimes is the blueprint for who we end up as we get older. And we used to think that that genetic material was the be-all and end-all, and once you had your genes in place, that you had no other control. And we now know that, in fact, that's not the case, that, in fact, our genetics might only contribute somewhere between 2 and 10 to 15% of who we are. And there's fascinating work by a cellular biologist, Dr. Bruce Lipman, and people might be very interested, if they are interested in this whole thing, is reading some of his work, which is very understandable in layman's terms. He has a book called The Biology of Belief. Very interesting book. And in there he says just that our genes are actually influenced dramatically up to 98% by our environment. And our environment obviously means a whole lot of different things, not only just the weather and the temperature and the pollution, but a whole range of other cellular things that I'd like to perhaps touch on through the course of the day.
Wonderful. Okay, so we need to pick up at what point exactly now,
well,
today?
Really, again, it's about this concept of taking responsibility. And what then are the areas that one needs to be responsible for? I like to use an analogy of an athlete, and perhaps an athlete that is heading towards being an elite athlete and someone that has achieved very well in their particular discipline. And really there are 3 areas that any athlete would consider as being very important for their success as an athlete. And of course the first component is one's physical body. If you want to be a runner or a high jumper or a cyclist, your physical body has to be able to withstand the rigors and traumas and trials of that particular activity. The onslaught.
What you're attempting.
Quite right.
That's
and
the
of
obvious
course,
one.
Yeah. So there are lots of components of one's physical body, in terms of your structural alignment, and from a chiropractic point of view, perhaps I can throw in there that chiropractic is an area that a lot of people know very little about. They may have heard ideas and concepts from other people that also have no real information about chiropractic as such. But chiropractic is a profession that's been around, as we know it, for about the last 110 years or thereabouts. But the concept of manipulative therapeutics and manipulating the joints of the spine has been around for thousands of years. If one just does some research onto the concept of manipulation, you can see photographs going back thousands of years, literally, to the Egyptian and
How
Greek.
folk were
And
pulled and stretched.
absolutely. So that idea that the structural, the vertebral column, and the other joints of the body play a significant role in one's actual health and wellness is a critical factor. And oftentimes, as chiropractors, we are maligned, may I say, from people that perhaps don't have all the real information. So chiropractic is something that is crucial to one's physical being, and a lot of athletes have their own chiropractor, or certainly use chiropractic as a form of therapy.
Yeah.
To keep their musculoskeletal and neurological system functioning at its optimum. And then, of course, the exercise component and the strengthening of the muscles and all of that goes with the physical body. The second component, of course, is the nutritional side. Just doesn't matter how fancy a motor vehicle one has. It can be the most sophisticated Jaguar or Ferrari, but if you put no fuel in it, it is actually useless.
Yes.
It just sits in the garage. And your body is exactly the same. It is a very sophisticated, self-healing organism, this body that we carry around with us. And it does depend very heavily on what you put into it in order for it to function at its optimum.
And Kevin, and when you put what you need to put into it, how important is that?
Absolutely, it's very important.
You use the analogy of the motor car in the garage. I mean, the historically and traditionally, the saying goes that you have breakfast like a king, lunch like a prince, and dinner like a pauper.
Yes.
So you eat more in the morning, but you progressively eat less.
Yes.
And in fact, in terms of our traditional way of life, we do the exact opposite.
Yeah, you're quite right. The mornings are always such a rush. One's got to get the kids up and ready and get off to work and sit in the traffic. So we pay very little attention to what we put in the early part of the morning. But it makes sense that through the day is when you need all your energy.
Yeah.
That's when you need your fuel, because generally one's more active during that time, using your brain and your obviously your body and your muscles.
Up all that fuel.
Correct. So having a healthy breakfast is important, and that doesn't only mean quantity, it certainly means quality as well, not only for breakfast obviously, but for all one's meals. So yes, timing is very important, and everybody has different biochemical rhythms. The body that we carry around with us, although we don't really think much about what's happening and how we're digesting food and the fact that our heart is beating and we're having to breathe, it's all happening on an involuntary basis. However, that involuntary basis does require certain coordination inside, and that is done via hormones and enzymes and chemical messenger substances. And interestingly, every item of food that you put into your mouth is actually now known to be a chemical messenger. So it's no longer just a carbohydrate, let's say, or a sugar or a fat. It actually has chemical messaging functions that it will send to each cell.
So it's not, the food is not just doing what it needs to do to fill a hole,
absolutely.
A hunger hole.
Yeah, absolutely. It's working very intensely to coordinate this biochemistry of your body that's happening millisecond by millisecond as one carries on through your day. So you're absolutely right that you need to constantly provide those correct chemical messengers, because we have pro-life and we have pro-death chemical messengers. And many of the foods that we take in, unfortunately, are considered anti-nutrients. They are not really that beneficial to one's biochemical function. And this often falls into the category of high refined intake of foods, fast foods, processed foods.
Now we're getting to the real issues. And in fact, as somebody described it once, that kind of food is dead food.
Absolutely.
You're not eating live food.
Correct.
Like in your raw fruit and vegetables and all that kind of thing.
So it's a very simple process, this whole thing of staying well and maintaining wellness. It's not difficult at all. It's not rocket science. It's very basic. However, due to the speed with which we are on that treadmill, it often becomes, I just don't have time. And this is again where one has to take responsibility and figure out that the results of not taking enough time can be devastating down the line.
There are consequences.
Absolutely. There are definitely consequences, and often it starts as dis-ease, where you just don't feel great. And I often describe it as my get up and go has got up and gone. Just don't feel yourself, a little demotivated, lack of enthusiasm, maybe a bit depressed even, but you can still function quite adequately and get by with everything that you need to get by, but you're just not firing on all cylinders. That state of dis-ease can quite quickly change to a state of disease, where the body's ability to compensate, its ability to kind of use its other backup mechanisms is diminished. And then it starts as high blood pressure or an ulcer or even something more serious like a proper disease process. So the nutrition is an extremely important component of what an athlete would use to keep themselves at the top of their game. And of course the third component that any athlete would consider would be the psychological and emotional component. I don't think you'll come across any athlete would say, you know what, I don't think I'm going to be able to succeed in this race today. I don't think I'm going to make it. I'll never jump that high. There's a very good chance.
And so he's speaking negativity.
Absolutely.
To himself.
Correct.
Yeah.
Those affirmations are very important, how you affirm to yourself. And in the words of Henry Ford, if you say you can or if you say you can't, you're right.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
As you program yourself, so you will be. And so those three areas are really the areas that one needs to look at if one is trying to be an elite athlete. Now, to just go on from that, what I try to encourage people to become is an elite athlete of life. So if you were going to be an elite athlete, you would concentrate on those three things. And if you wanted to be an elite athlete of life, and that means feeling fulfilled, feeling that state of inner peace, having a life purpose, being healthy, being motivated, being enthusiastic, being continually upbeat, all those components of happiness and positivity and enthusiasm.
And not just for a small portion of time.
Correct.
For quite a considerable length of time or substantial length of time.
Absolutely. That sustainability is important. Peaks and valleys are not good for us. So you're fine for a couple of weeks and you feel fantastic, and then you're down in the dumps for the next couple of weeks and everything's doomy and gloomy, and then you're up again. The body doesn't respond well to that. It likes kind of a sustained
sort of an equilibrium.
Correct.
That it likes to maintain.
There will always be ups and downs naturally, and in the last talk I think we talked about the University of Life, where we're in this university and we're learning lessons all the time, and some lessons are less exciting than others and some are actually quite taxing and stressful, but that's what helps us to grow. That's what helps us to progress.
And talking about the peaks and valleys, Kevin, if each one of us had to put a graph on a wall of what our lives are like at the moment, I'm sure a lot of those points would jump off the charts.
Absolutely. Well, that's the thing.
That's how bad our lives are.
And you make a very relevant point there about monitoring. Very often we don't really monitor our lives. We just go like a buoy in the sea that is just pushed by the tide this way, and then the tide changes and we go that way.
We don't attempt to swim back to shore.
Correct.
Against the tide.
We don't have direction. We don't have a strategy in place to really direct operations. And as much as it sounds, oh my gosh, that's another thing that I now have to do, it really comes to depend on whether one wants to experience that feeling of success and health and wellness and all those things that I spoke about.
It's your life. It's your choice.
Life. Absolutely, as we say, to coin a phrase. So yes, it does require some planning, just as in any business that one would be in. There are very few businesses that just arrive on a daily basis, go through the whole year without any plan, any business strategy, without having strategic meetings about where they're going, about setting goals for what turnover should be and bad debt should be, and etc., etc. They have very clear outline. Most CEOs of most companies, I would think, although I'm not a CEO of a company, but I think from what I've heard and spoken to people about, they know exactly where they're going.
Yeah. And in the words, I beg your pardon, of another wise person, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail.
That's quite right. That's quite right.
And While his core business is chiropractic and while optimum functioning of the neuromuscular skeletal system is so vital, there are so many other components that combine to allow us as human beings to function at optimum potential. Our nutritional and mental states play an integral role in all aspects of our physiology, for example. And so today, Dr. Kevin Lentin is presenting the second in his new series of monthly chats called Your Life, Your Choice, around how to optimally manage wellness. And so you gave us the analogy of the athlete, the elite athlete,
Yes.
looking at the physical body, the nutritional body, and of course the psychological state of our elite athlete.
And as we did say right in the beginning, that it's a case of taking responsibility. And what tends to happen is, as I see in clinical practice, and this is what I base sort of all of my knowledge on, is there are kind of almost three categories of people that would fall into that trying to become an athlete. And the first one is the couch potato. So, so the couch potato is obviously somebody that hasn't got to the point of elite athleticism, athleticism, if that's a better word. There we go, thank you.
Yes.
And what we're trying to say is that if you want to be an elite athlete of life, and we're drawing this analogy again with the elite athlete as a sportsman, the couch potato is someone that constantly finds something wrong with life. There's always it's a poor me kind of environment that you're in. It's everybody else's fault. There's lots of blame. It can never be my fault at all. There's always a reason. Blame the economy, blame the government, blame the boss, blame the wife.
So he's an optimistic pessimist, is
Absolutely. Yeah. And that sort of individual is often in victim mode. And these are the ones that are very difficult to almost jolt out of that state, because they have some sort of a vested interest, believe it or not, in their state of non-well-being. Because they get positive strokes from that, from people, oh, shame, poor, that must be terrible.
Yes.
And it's a strange dynamic that goes on. As much as you can point out to these folk that if they could just move a little bit, they would be a little bit more in control of their environment.
Correct.
But it becomes very difficult. And these people, they put no effort into their state of wellness, and so they reap no rewards from there, and they become diseased and eventually diseased, as we've said. And of course, the second type of person is a little bit more active. Let's call him or her the weekend warrior.
Ooh.
You know, they're out there. They've kind of identified with this idea. Yes, I do need to do something in order to feel better. I need to kind of get myself going and a bit more motivated.
So our couch potato is a non-athlete, let's put it
Absolutely.
that way, and our weekend warrior is a part-time athlete.
Part-time. He's or she's starting to realize that they have to do something in order to reap some kind of reward. So they do nothing during the week. They're not prepared to address it. But on the weekend, they get out on a Saturday morning, they jump into into their tackies, and off they go down the road, or they try to cycle. They're kind of a wannabe elite athlete. They haven't quite got their head around exactly how much work it is to be an elite athlete of life, for example.
While we're on that subject, Kevin, sorry to interrupt you, if that is all that the person can manage to start off with in terms of his or her time, is it a good or a bad thing to be going out, onto the streets and walking for, say, an hour or half an hour?
No, it's not a bad thing at all. In fact, any progress, from a change in behavior is better than no progress at all, for sure. And we're talking on a sort of physical level. They're not getting out there and doing things. But the change can also be internal. It can be a mind shift. I call it a mind state recalibration. So I think I gave the definition last time of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and hoping for a different result.
Okay.
And that was Einstein's definition. And that's what a lot of us do. We just hope that things are going to change. We just hope that it'll get better, when in fact we keep doing the same thing, and so it's very unlikely that it's going to be. So if no matter what you do, whatever changes you do make, those are definitely beneficial. This individual, this wannabe athlete, the sort of weekend warrior, they still have elements of couch potato-ness.
So they haven't quite let go.
Correct. And then, of course, the third component is someone that has decided to really embrace this concept and really start moving ahead. And it doesn't mean extra time. Again, it can be changes just on a nutritional level, changes on an emotional level. There's a lovely saying by one of my gurus, if I can use that term, Dr. Wayne Dyer. I think we talked about it last time, is when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And quite often that's just what it needs, is just that mind state recalibration, or a shifting of the mind furniture a little bit, just to say, you know what, there is an alternative. I could do this slightly differently. Do I actually need to have that cream pie there? Do I really need to do that? And that brings us to what we were discussing at the break, is the programming.
Yeah.
And this is where it does become quite difficult, and often does require quite a bit of mental recalibration, because from the time of birth, actually, we start to acquire information. Obviously, when you're born with an empty subconscious mind. There's been no experience yet of life. And slowly but surely you start to accumulate information. Very subtly initially, and gradually you go through preschool and school, and all the people that come into your life start to program you in certain ways. And obviously your parents play a large role in that. And if the programming is negative, or if you see the environment in which you are involved, your home life, and you see that your parents are not elite athletes of life, they are couch potatoes as well, your programming becomes like that.
It's not going to be any different.
Correct.
Until you get to the point where you've decided to change.
Yeah. And of course, the longer you leave that, if you decide to change in your 40s and 50s perhaps, due to some kind of life crisis, it's then much more difficult to make those shifts, very often. Not impossible, but more difficult. So it does take some time to kind of recalibrate one's thoughts about where do you want to be, how do you want to experience life, what is success for you, in terms of your well-being and your health and your environment, and how you interact with your friends, your loved ones, your family, etc. It's that kind of decision time.
Kevin, can I just ask you, in your experience and in your practice, particularly as this relates to the physical manifestations of people's unhealthy lifestyle, would it be incorrect to say that there are still people who do not understand the link between their state of mind and the state of their physical body, and how this dis-ease manifests in back pain, in leg pain, in whatever kind of physical pain?
I'm so glad you brought that up, Lynn, because I call it the noradrenaline syndrome. Now, I'm sure most folk have heard of adrenaline. It's a very powerful hormone. It's part of what we call the flight or fight mechanism. Yes. And that adrenaline allows us to deal with emergency situations. So, for example, if you're driving along in your car, very nicely, calm, cool, collected, and there's almost an accident in front of you, you have to jam on your brakes, and there's a big physiological reaction. Your body almost instantly, via the adrenal glands, one of the endocrine glands of the endocrine system, produce adrenaline. Your eyes dilate, your heart rate goes up, you can feel, your anxiety level goes up, your muscles tense, you can perspire.
In fact, you feel faint.
Absolutely, from quite right. Now, that adrenaline state you cannot sustain for an ongoing period. It allows one to do amazing things. You've heard of elderly ladies beating off attackers, young attackers,
scaling high walls,
lifting a car off a child that's trapped. Emergency kind of measures required for an emergency situation. However, to manage life, we can't be on that emergency hormone all the time. It's just too powerful. So the body has a backup mechanism to allow you to defend yourself against the onslaught of life. And that is the work pressures, the career issues, the deadlines, the traffic, perhaps relationship issues that one might have, financial issues, dealing with family, all of the everyday stuff that we all have to deal with. Now, the body puts itself into a state called defense physiology. It tries to defend itself against this. And it does this physiologically via the production of these chemical messenger substances. And what this noradrenaline does, together with other hormones, it initially upregulates, or says to the musculoskeletal system, go on guard, tense up to help protect me. I feel like I'm being hit physically by the external world. I'm just being bombarded. You probably hear people saying that.
Yes.
I'm just bombarded constantly by this and that. Correct. So you get back pain and neck pain and spasm and headaches because the muscles have gone into that state of spasm and tension. It will secondly say to the cardiovascular system, which is the heart and the vessels, start working harder, to the heart pump harder to get blood to circulate around, to help bring nutrients to these muscles, help bring oxygen to help relax. So your heart rate goes up. You can have anxiety attacks. You can have palpitations. And, of course, eventually your blood pressure starts to climb. And eventually down the line, you can even have a heart attack. It will say to the digestive system, slow down, because the digestive system requires a lot of energy. But staying in the state of defense physiology also requires a lot of energy. It's like a sentry that's on guard all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so you start with things like spastic colon and irritable bowel syndrome, and even food intolerances and bloating and flatulence and irregular bowel movements, all of that sort of thing. Eventually an ulcer, and way down the line, potentially even colon cancer. It will down-regulate serotonin. Serotonin is your body's happy chemical. We need lots of that to make us feel good and enthusiastic and motivated. But one can't be bombarded by thoughts of worry and anxiety and distress and be happy at the same time. So your mood can go down, your enthusiasm level goes down, your motivation for life goes down. As we said earlier, your get up and go has got up and gone, and you can actually be clinically depressed. And it will down-regulate the reproductive system, because the reproductive system is there for conception. Regardless of one's age or stage in life, whether it's the right time for a baby to be conceived. But anatomically and physiologically, we have all the right anatomy. However, in this state, when the body is sort of overwhelmed by all these stress chemicals, it well knows that that's not the right environment for a fetus to be bathed in all of these kind of chemicals. So we see a lot of infertility today. And folk are obviously trying to force the issue by having in vitro fertilization and gifts and all of these kind of things. And I'm not so sure that that's actually the correct way to go when the foundation areas haven't been addressed to begin with. And finally, this whole noradrenaline syndrome will upregulate the production of cortisol. Cortisol is your body's...
I've heard much about
Yes,
that.
this is a very big one.
Not to be confused with cortisone.
Almost, in that it's your body's natural cortisone. It's a very similar molecule.
But this is cortisol.
Cortisol, which is a natural. Cortisone is an unnatural substance that is manufactured, and you take it from the outside, in injection form or oral. But cortisol is an internally produced substance that the body produces on its own.
Also bad?
No. In certain amounts, it's good. It helps you to get by with your day, because your day...
So moderation. Cortisol in moderation is not necessarily a bad thing.
In fact, it's a good thing.
It's a good thing.
However, cortisol should be produced at around about 6 o'clock in the morning, at its maximum, to be there for you during the day when you might need it. You might be traumatized during the day when you're awake. You might bump yourself, for example. The body will send cortisol there as an anti-inflammatory. So that's good. However, in this state of constant defense physiology, there gets a dollop, if you like, a whole amount of cortisol produced at around about 3 o'clock in the morning, or somewhere between 1 o'clock and 3 o'clock in the morning, which usually wakes you up. So very often people are fatigued through this whole process, and all of their systems, as I've elucidated, are affected in some way or another, and so they are fatigued generally. However, if they sit in the chair at 7 o'clock in the evening, they'll fall asleep, but they wake up at 1 or 2 and then can't get back to sleep again. Now this whole pattern is what's called a cycle. It's a cycle. And it means that life is actually managing you.
And not the
You're
other
no
way
longer
around.
in control. And too often what we do is we suppress all of those symptoms. So we'll take anti-inflammatories and painkillers and even go to a chiropractor or massage therapist to have the symptom of muscle spasm taken away.
But of course, by its very nature, that's a temporary solution. Sort of a plaster.
Absolutely, it's a band-aid
wound.
approach. And then you go to the doctor and say, my heart's thumping and pounding, and he puts you onto a beta blocker to slow down your heart rate or something for your blood pressure. And then you go to the gynecologist because your hormones are all over the show,
You're
or
not having
to
a
the
baby.
urologist.
Oh my goodness.
And then you go to the gastroenterologist because you've got spastic colon and irritable bowel and you're constipated. And then you go to the psychologist because your mind is not functioning at its optimum. And often it's medication and pills, and or one will just suppress it with things like alcohol and smoking and bad eating habits and
drugs, heaven forbid.
Absolutely. And instead of going right back to the source, which is the programming. And that's where we come right back now to this concept of wellness, and how in order to be well there are a number of areas that one needs to address. You cannot achieve wellness from the outside, whether it's by a chiropractor, whether it's from a vitamin or a pill of some kind. Health and wellness can never come from the outside. It can only be generated from the inside.
So Kevin Lentin's life journey has brought him to the place now where his 25 years of clinical experience in the health and wellness world have led him into the realm of behavioral analysis. A greater percentage of his time is now spent in corporate training in such fields as behavior modification, lifestyle modification, self-communication, preventative wellness, and stress management. His calling now is to communicate the many and varied techniques that he has learned to show people how to function at their optimum potential and release the shackles preventing expression of their full potential. Since last month then, and God willing continuing on a future regular monthly basis, Kevin will be sharing his unique blend of experience as a chiropractor, clinical nutritionist and psychology graduate, which positions him perfectly, he says, as a wellness expert to guide and enhance performance and productivity within organizations in particular, in a series called Your Life, Your Choice. We had a very interesting question from Trevor. Trevor was talking about shifts. He obviously works shifts, and he wants to know how all of what you've been sharing with us, affects somebody who works shifts.
Absolutely. It's certainly a little bit more challenging for shift workers. However, our body is the most amazing self-healing organism, as I mentioned, and it will adapt to virtually any situation that you throw at it, provided the concepts and the basic foundation is maintained. So oftentimes if one thinks of a building, and when you see a building and you look up at it, very often you see what's above the ground, and it looks fantastic, beautiful architectural work, and if you walk inside, the decor looks fantastic, and you think, wow, what a beautiful building. But in fact, that building is nothing without its foundation. And the foundation is what we've been speaking about. It's about nutrition. It's about looking after yourself physically. It's about psycho-emotional stability and addressing areas and issues and conflicts. It's about not having a desire for conflict and trauma in your life, to associate with happy, well, motivated and enthusiastic people. So that's no different for shift workers. It might be a bit different at night and during the day, and obviously one just has to turn the whole thing around. And with time, as the body adapts to those situations, provided you're getting enough nutrients and you don't stop eating just because your lunch actually happens to be at midnight.
Exactly.
And then you end up with a pie and chips just because that's the easiest thing to get. It does require a little bit more sort of planning and organization. But for shift workers, it should really be no different.
Okay. Does your body not go into rebellion mode, so to speak?
Yeah, initially there will be that
because your whole
change.
body clock is out of sync.
Correct. There certainly will be a phase of adaptation where you have to take care and be more aware of what you do. But with time, I really do believe that one can manage it, because shift workers manage it very successfully. Very often what is a bit more confusing for the body is when you have shifts within shifts. So 4 days on night shift and 4 days on day shift, and then 4 days on night shift and 4 days on, like is in the paramedic world.
Yeah, so there's no stability.
Correct.
There's no continuity.
Correct.
Yeah.
Then
so just when the body's getting used to the shift, it changes.
Yeah, you change the parameters again. Even having said that, over time, if you do that routinely and regularly, the body will adapt to that as well. It becomes used to that kind of programming, and it will follow that very effectively, provided you're doing the basics to keep your body physically fit, etc., as I've said.
Okay. Hopefully, Trevor, that will settle your unease, if you have any unease around your shift work. Kevin, I'm afraid to say the time's run completely away with us and from us. You were going to touch on something else. Let's leave that for next time around, God willing. I do want you, though, in closing, to refresh our minds around the ABCs. I have a sneaking suspicion you have shared this with us before, but remind us.
Yes, the ABCs. In paramedic work, those are the cornerstones: the airway, breathing, and the circulation. In life as well, it's the same thing, the ABCs. And really the ABCs stand for A, for awareness. You have to be aware of what the circumstances are. Balance, one needs to create balance in one's life in all of those spheres. And control. Eventually it does come down to discipline and deciding to take action.
So simple as that.
It's as easy as that.
As basic as that,
as
the ABCs. Bless you, Kevin, as informative and necessary as always this information is. We look forward to next time.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you for having me again.
Give us your details, the website, telephone number, whatever else you want to share with us.
Thank you so much. Yes, my website is www.chiropractic, Dr. Kevin Lentin, lentin.co.za. There's always some information on there. My practice is in Kenilworth, and my phone number is 021 674 0548.
Great. Thanks so much.
Thank you,
God
Lynn.
bless you.